Remember the last time you're talking to someone you know well. Maybe a partner, a friend, someone from your family. You're standing there listening to them speak, but at the same time something else is happening. Your mind is remembering past conversations, interpreting their tone, predicting what they might say next, and slowly, almost invisibly, the present moment gets mixed with your past experience of this person. A kind of mental image appears, and that image quietly replaces the living person in front of you. So the interaction is no longer direct. You're not interacting with the person, you're interacting with the idea of them, built from memory, expectation, and evaluation. Most people don't notice this, but this is why for most of the time life is rarely experienced directly. It is interpreted, filtered, commented on, and over time that commentary quietly becomes the reality we live in. Not actual reality, but our mental version of it. This doesn't only happen in relationships, it's how perception works most of the time. A modern person rarely experiences the world without interpretation. Even when we think we are simply seeing reality, there is usually a thin layer between us and what is happening. A layer made of concepts, names, judgments, comparisons. This layer feels natural, so we don't question it. But it quietly changes how we experience life. Instead of the living moment, we receive a simplified version of it. Most people don't interact with the reality and only interact with the mental projection of it. This idea might sound unusual, but philosophers and contemplative traditions actually noticed this a long time ago. In the Vedic tradition, this filtering of reality was called Maya, the veil of perception. Buddha pointed out that what we experience is shaped by the mind. Plato described people watching shadows on the wall of a cave and believing those shadows were the world itself. Later, Kant suggested that we never encounter reality exactly as it is, only how it appears through the structures of the mind. Different cultures, different languages, but they were describing the same phenomenon. There is a filter between us and reality, an invisible veil of perception between us and the world. A very subtle one, because it's made of thoughts, and thoughts feel like us. And most of the time we stay behind it without noticing. One simple example shows how quickly it forms. Philosopher Jiddu Krishnamurti once said that when a child is taught the name of the bird, he stops seeing the bird, he sees only the word. It's not a poetic metaphor, it's a quite literal description how the filter of the mind operates. When a child first sees a bird, there is curiosity, attention, movement, but the moment the child learns the name of the bird, something changes. Instead of seeing the living creature, the mind recognizes the label, and recognition replaces discovery. The experience becomes shorter, flatter, less alive. This doesn't mean language is a problem, concepts are useful, but over time they begin to dominate perception. Instead of meeting reality directly, we meet the idea of reality. This replacement of the living moment with concepts isn't a mistake or a malfunction. It's the mind's standard operation mode. It runs automatically without your conscious involvement, constantly sorting experiences onto internal shelves, naming, evaluating, relating everything to what is already known, cataloging reality. This process affects everything we see: trees, sky, people, especially people. This is where it has the most devastating effect, because with them the mind builds the most complex images. When you look at someone close to you, you're not only seeing them in the present moment, you're also seeing your history with them, memories, old emotions, expectations, unfinished conversations. All of this forms a mental version of the person, and that version gets projected onto the real one. People become fixed identities in our mind, so when interacting, we're not fully meeting the living person, we're meeting the character our mind created. This ghost of a person feels convenient because it's predictable, fixed, easy to understand. It gives the mind a sense of control. It removes uncertainty. A real person is alive, fluid, unpredictable, and meeting someone like that requires presence. So the mind prefers dealing with the idea of a person rather than the reality of them. Over time, this creates something like a screen between us and the world, a conceptual layer. Every new moment passes through that layer. The mind checks it against the past, interprets it, classifies it, and slowly you lose the ability to experience anything as truly new. Life becomes more predictable, more repetitive, not because reality is repetitive, but because the mind keeps projecting the same patterns onto it. The most staggering is that the majority of these patterns were not consciously chosen. They formed early in life. From childhood, we absorb ways of seeing the world. From parents, from school, from culture, from language itself. Ideas about what is important, what is dangerous, what we should become, what success means. Over time, these external perspectives become internal, and eventually they start to feel like our own thoughts. But often they are simply inherited interpretations repeating themselves. These inherited judgments begin to operate like unquestioned truths in the background of the mind. They quietly appear in every perception, automatically classifying people, events, and situations before any conscious choice arises, quietly shaping our perception of reality. This mechanism of the mind works very fast. It constantly sorts experience into categories, good or bad, safe or threatening, right or wrong. But these judgments usually come from the past conditioning, not from what is actually happening now. And because the process is so fast, it feels natural. It feels like we are responding to life. But what we're actually responding to is our own interpretation of life. When this goes on for years, something subtle happens. A person begins to live more and more inside the mind. Instead of direct experience, there is continuous internal commentary, explaining what's happening, analyzing it, comparing it to the past, projecting the future. Life becomes something we think about, rather than something we fully experience. We start to live in the echo of reality, rather than reality itself. And this mental echo gradually replaces reality. In the most literal sense, this is a hidden form of prison. Life begins to unfold within one's own mental world, constructed not from external constraints, but from persistent naming and interpretation. As if existing within a matrix, a world created not from code, but from formed mental images. This world seems real because you've never stepped outside its matrix. This is what is called a mental cage, not a dramatic one, not something visible, but a structure made of thoughts, interpretations, and internal narratives. And because we've lived inside it for so long, it feels normal, even safe. This cognitive imprisonment feels paradoxically comfortable because it is familiar. The mind prefers familiar interpretations, even if painful, over the unpredictability of direct experience. And if this mechanism remains unconscious, a person begins to obey it, effectively becoming a slave of the mind. Being a slave of the mind means that reactions become automatic, emotions follow random thoughts, and choices are limited by the boundaries of one's own conditioning. Life begins to run on something like autopilot. It is controlled by a stream of involuntary thinking that is taken for oneself, commenting, evaluating, replaying conversations, imagining future scenarios. At some point, we begin to believe that this voice in our head is who we are. In fact, many traditions use the image of prison when describing a mechanism of being trapped by the mind. Its walls aren't stone, they are made of thoughts. The bars are the concepts you use to see the world, and the jailer is the mind you've identified with. But the key is to see that it's not about punishment, not about being forced from outside. It's a mechanism, a way the mind keeps awareness locked in a limited view of reality. In some traditions, for example in Bhagavata Purana from Vedic texts, they say the mind, manas, and the false ego, ahankara, creates a state called bandha. In that state, the self, the Atman, starts seeing itself as a prisoner of the material world. Srila Prabhupada called it a prison directly, and the mind is what keeps you locked in. Hence, spiritual practice is about opening the door. Other traditions like Advaita Vedanta put it differently. Shankara, Ramana Maharshi, Nisargadatta Maharaj say the present isn't actually real. It's in perception. It comes from avidya, ignorance, and adhyasa, overlaying thoughts on pure consciousness. You're not trapped, you just think you are, because you're merged with the flow of your thoughts. Hence, freedom isn't living. Freedom is seeing who you really are. Some talk about a prison, others say it never existed, only belief in it does. Either way, they're pointing at the same thing, identifying consciousness with thought. That's what causes suffering. That's what makes life feel small. The same idea is echoed in Buddhism. Buddhism calls it ignorance, avidya, and the proliferation of concept, papancha. Ideas and beliefs build the cage we live in, and we mistake mental construction for reality itself. Zen talks about the chains of names and forms that hide direct experience. Plato's cave is the same story. People aren't chained physically, they are chained in the mind. They take shadows for reality because they've never seen anything else. Escape feels like a threat because it undermines the world they know. Christian mystics like Meister Eckhart, John of the Cross, Isaac of Nineveh describe it as a veil. Behind it, the living presence of God disappears. You become a prisoner of your ego, mistaking internal noise for who you are. Sufism calls it the nafs, a structure that keeps a person trapped in a state of sleep and separation. The nafs creates the illusion of a separate I, and in doing so, it maintains this inner imprisonment. It keeps you asleep, divided, believing in a separate self. Hence, freedom isn't fixing the nafs, it's stepping beyond it. Modern philosophy points here too. Heidegger shows us trapped in interpretations of being. Foucault talks about internal systems controlling us even without external force. Today's prisoner is consciousness identifying with the flow of its own thoughts, mistaking the story for itself. Across cultures, across time, the cage is real, and it isn't. It's the mind, the identification. Seeing that, really seeing it, is how the door opens. Modern neuroscience is gradually confirming what philosophical and spiritual traditions have been saying for centuries. The brain does not register reality directly, it builds a model of it. Your brain has no direct access to the world. It receives electrical signals from senses and, interpreting them based on past experience, constructs the most probable picture of what is happening. British neuroscientist Anil Seth calls this controlled hallucination. We see not what is, but what the brain considers most probable based on past experience. The simplest illustration of this is optical and auditory illusions. These illusions are not a system failure, but a demonstration of its basic operating principle. The same mechanism is used to create the sense of self. The feeling of me is also a model, assembled from memory, emotions, and bodily sensations. Experiments in neuroscience show that even our sense of owning a body can be influenced or temporarily altered, which suggests that the self we experience is also constructed. It is built from memories, emotions, sensations, narratives held together by continuous thinking. And as long as we fully identify with that process, we live inside the mental cage. This mental load is exhausting. The constant chatter in your mind drains energy. It leaves you tired, tense, all the time, even when there is no obvious reason. It's a very heavy burden. It's what creates that subtle, constant sense of separation, the feeling of being alone, of being separate in a fragmented world. This sense of division comes directly from living in a personalized reality built by your thoughts. True connection is only possible beyond individual minds, but the noise of thinking makes it hard to connect with others just as much as hard to connect with the deeper part of yourself, hiding beneath the chatter. You can't really meet someone else if there's a wall of concepts between you. Closeness needs shared space, space free from judgments, free from interpretation. The same goes for knowing yourself. If you're fully identified with the conditioned mind, your true nature remains hidden. The true self isn't a stream of thoughts. It's the silent awareness in which the thoughts arise. And yet, the state of being trapped in thought isn't a life sentence. The moment the prison is recognized, the key is revealed. Just noticing the mind-compulsive chatter is already the beginning of freedom. This noticing belongs to a different dimension of awareness than the thoughts it observes. Awareness doesn't interpret, it just registers what's happening. The start of the process always shows up as noticing thoughts. Thoughts can be noticed because the one noticing them is not a thought. It's not freedom yet, but it's the first crack in the cage. Different traditions point to this, they just use different words. Advaita says freedom begins the moment attention stops merging with thoughts and recognizes itself as the awareness in which they arise. Ramana Maharshi put it simply, you are not the mind, you are the one who knows the mind. It's not about stopping thoughts, it's about shifting your point of identification. Buddhism says suffering ends the moment thoughts and states stop being seen as me or mine. Mindfulness practices aren't about controlling the mind. They are about watching it without identification. Buddha's formula is simple, not me, not mine, not myself. Freedom begins with this disidentification. The Vedic Upanishads say the same. The Atman is the witness of the mind, not its contents. Self-knowledge begins when you stop taking the mind and intellect, manas and buddhi, as yourself, and recognize yourself as the sakshi, the observing consciousness. Sufism says freedom comes when you stop identifying with the nafs and recognize yourself as the witness. Rumi wrote that the mind is a veil, and when attention steps back from thoughts, presence opens up, the presence that was always here. Christian mystic Meister Eckhart said God is revealed only where the mind stops talking about itself. Self-knowledge begins in inner silence. You stop being the voice of thoughts, you become the one who notices them. Modern research confirms this. Practices that cultivate meta-awareness, noticing thoughts without merging with them, activate different neural networks that experiencing them as me, which can serve as an evidence of an ancient insight. Observing awareness is qualitatively different from thinking. Different traditions use different images, but they all point to the same movement. Freedom begins not with controlling the mind, but with disidentifying with it. As long as thoughts are experienced as me, your true nature stays hidden. The moment you notice a thought, something interesting becomes clear. If a thought can be observed, it cannot be the observer, because you are the one seeing it. This is the first small crack in the cage. Instead of being fully inside the stream of thinking, awareness begins to observe it, and that alone begins to loosen the structure of the cage, not by fighting the mind, but by seeing it clearly. Not freedom yet, but the beginning of awareness. When thinking becomes the object of awareness, another level of consciousness appears, quiet, unchanging, free. Many contemplative traditions begin exactly here, not by trying to fix the personality and not by trying to become a better version of the self, but by recognizing that the self we are trying to improve is a mental construction. In Advaita, attention turns toward the awareness that knows the mind. In Buddhism, thoughts are seen as events that arise and pass, not identity. In Sufism, the psychological self begins to soften when awareness deepens. Different language, same discovery. You are not the commentary. You are the awareness that can notice it. However, working directly with the mind can be difficult. It's too quick, too clever, it grabs control instantly. That's why traditions rarely started by analyzing complicated human relationships or trying to fix yourself. They started somewhere the mind couldn't take over, somewhere it couldn't fit its projections. Nature. Nature offers a soft, accessible way in because it exists outside human concepts and judgments. It just is. A flower doesn't compare itself to other flowers. This is why those practicing are naturally drawn to nature. Not because it's something mystical, but because it doesn't fit the usual mental projections. Nature doesn't do the practice for you, but it creates conditions where it's easier to step out of mental patterns and temporarily live a direct experience. In the next episode, we'll explore why being in nature often brings a sense of relief, why thinking becomes quiet there, and how natural environments help us notice the difference between direct experience and mental commentary, not as an escape from life, but as a way to return to it directly.